What happens when Hollywood's biggest superstar meets her match in the form of late-night television's most ruthless host? You won't believe what unfolds when Jennifer Lopez sits down for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview, only to find herself trapped in a web of personal attacks and professional sabotage that would leave audiences stunned and social media ablaze. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when two entertainment titans clash in the most explosive confrontation late-night TV has ever witnessed. Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live was supposed to be business as usual. Jennifer Lopez, radiant in a stunning emerald green dress, walked onto the set to thunderous applause from the studio audience. She was there to promote her latest projects, her upcoming tour, and what should have been a celebratory moment in her illustrious career. The atmosphere seemed electric, the kind of energy that makes for great television. Little did anyone know that within minutes, this routine celebrity interview would spiral into one of the most uncomfortable and shocking confrontations in late-night television history. As Lopez settled into the guest chair, flashing her signature smile and exchanging pleasantries with Kimmel, there was an undercurrent of tension that seasoned viewers of the show might have recognized. Kimmel's opening remarks seemed friendly enough on the surface, but there was something in his tone, a sharpness that suggested this wasn't going to be the typical softball celebrity interview that audiences had come to expect. "So, Jennifer," Kimmel began with that trademark smirk, "you've been in the headlines quite a bit lately, haven't you?" The question seemed innocent enough, but the way he delivered it, with a slight emphasis on the word headlines, immediately put Lopez on guard. Her smile faltered just slightly, a micro-expression that cameras caught, but the live audience might have missed. Lopez maintained her composure, responding with grace, "Well, Jimmy, I'm always working on new projects, so yes, people tend to talk about what I'm up to." She tried to steer the conversation toward her upcoming album and tour dates, but Kimmel wasn't having it. "Oh, I think we both know the headlines I'm talking about aren't exactly about your music," Kimmel pressed, his voice taking on that familiar tone he uses when he's about to go in for the kill. The studio audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the change in atmosphere. This wasn't the fun, light-hearted banter they'd expected. Lopez's publicist, sitting in the green room, immediately recognized what was happening. This wasn't going according to the pre-interview agreement. They had specifically discussed topics that were off-limits, personal matters that were not to be addressed during the segment. But here was Kimmel, barely 3 minutes into the interview, already pushing boundaries that had been clearly established. "Jimmy, I thought we were here to talk about my new work," Lopez said, her voice steady but with an edge that hadn't been there moments before. "That's what your producers and I agreed on." The tension was now palpable, and cameras captured every micro-expression, every subtle shift in body language between the two stars. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, that infuriating smirk growing wider. "Well, you know how these things go, Jennifer. Sometimes the conversation just naturally flows to more interesting topics." The word interesting dripped with implication, and it was clear that Kimmel had come prepared for battle. What happened next would be dissected by entertainment journalists for weeks to come. Instead of backing down or gracefully deflecting, Lopez made the decision to confront Kimmel head-on about his tactics. "Are you seriously going to ambush me on live television after we had a clear agreement?" she asked, her voice rising just enough for the studio microphones to pick up every word. The audience was now completely silent, the kind of dead silence that only occurs when people realize they're witnessing something that's gone terribly wrong. Kimmel's band stopped their usual between-segment noodling, and even the cameramen seemed frozen in place, unsure whether to keep rolling or cut to commercial. But Kimmel wasn't done. In fact, he was just getting started. And what came next would push Lopez to a breaking point that no one in that studio could have anticipated. "Let's talk about your personal brand, Jennifer," Kimmel continued, his voice dripping with false sincerity. You've built quite the empire on being relatable, haven't you? The girl from the block who made it big." He paused for dramatic effect, letting the words hang in the air like a loaded weapon. "But isn't it interesting how that narrative changes when we look at some of your more recent business decisions?" Lopez's eyes flashed with anger, but she maintained her composure with the skill of someone who'd been in the entertainment industry for decades. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Jimmy, but I've always been honest about my journey and where I come from." "Honest?" Kimmel repeated, leaning forward with predatory interest. "That's fascinating because I have some information here that might surprise you." He reached for a stack of papers that had been strategically placed on his desk, papers that weren't part of the original show rundown. Lopez's team in the green room immediately went into panic mode, frantically trying to figure out what Kimmel was about to pull. The studio audience could feel the shift in energy. What had started as uncomfortable tension was now morphing into something much more sinister. Kimmel was clearly operating off-script, and everyone present knew they were witnessing something that would either make television history or destroy careers. "You see, Jennifer, I've been doing some digging," Kimmel said, waving the papers theatrically. "And it turns out that some of your business practices might not align with that down-to-earth image you've cultivated." His smile was cruel now, all pretense of friendly banter completely abandoned. Lopez sat straighter in her chair, her media training kicking into overdrive. "Jimmy, whatever you think you know, maybe you should have your facts straight before making accusations on national television." Her voice was controlled, but there was steel beneath the silk. "Oh, I have my facts straight," Kimmel shot back. "In fact, I have documentation right here about how you've been treating the crew on your latest projects. Reports of impossible demands, people being fired for minor infractions, working conditions that would make a sweatshop owner blush." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Lopez's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, and then something much more dangerous: cold fury. "You have absolutely no right to ambush me with unsubstantiated claims," she said, her voice rising. "This is beyond unprofessional. It's defamatory." Kimmel was in his element now, feeding off the chaos he'd created. "Unsubstantiated? I have 3 different sources who worked on your last film who tell a very different story about Jennifer Lopez than the one your publicists want us to believe." From the green room, Lopez's team was frantically trying to get the producers to cut to commercial. But Kimmel's people had clearly been instructed to let this play out. The host had orchestrated this entire ambush, and he was going to see it through to its explosive conclusion. "You want to sit there and lecture me about professionalism?" Lopez stood up abruptly, her chair rolling backward. The sudden movement startled everyone in the studio. "You invited me here under false pretenses. You're violating our agreement, and now you're spreading rumors and gossip like some kind of tabloid hack." The insult hit its mark. Kimmel's face darkened, and for a moment his carefully constructed television persona slipped completely. "Tabloid hack? Lady, I've been doing this for 20 years. I don't need to make up stories when the truth is so much more interesting." "The truth?" Lopez laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The truth is that you're a bully who gets his kicks from humiliating guests who can't fight back because they're trapped in your little kingdom here." The studio audience was completely silent now, witnessing something that felt more like a public execution than entertainment. Security personnel had quietly moved closer to the stage, unsure of what might happen next. Kimmel stood up too, matching Lopez's aggressive posture. "You know what your problem is, Jennifer. You've been living in your bubble of yes men and enablers for so long that you can't handle anyone asking you real questions." "Real questions?" Lopez's voice cracked with indignation. "These aren't questions, Jimmy. This is a hit job, and everyone in this studio knows it." What happened next would be the moment that defined the entire confrontation. The point of no return that would make this interview legendary for all the wrong reasons. Kimmel reached for another sheet of paper, one that had been deliberately placed at the bottom of his stack. His eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction as he prepared to deliver what he clearly believed would be the killing blow. Since we're talking about truth, Jennifer, let's discuss your upcoming tour. Specifically, let's talk about the ticket prices you're charging your fans, the same fans you claim to love so much. Lopez's face went ashen. This was crossing a line that even she hadn't anticipated. What does that have to do with anything we've discussed? Everything, Kimmel replied, his voice taking on a mock-serious tone. You're charging working families hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars to see you perform. Meanwhile, you're sitting here talking about staying connected to your roots. Don't you see the hypocrisy in that? The accusation was particularly cruel because it struck at the heart of Lopez's public image, her connection to her working-class background. Lopez's hands were visibly shaking now, not from fear, but from barely contained rage. You have no idea what goes into producing a world-class show, the costs involved, the hundreds of people who depend on these tours for their livelihoods. Oh, please, Kimmel scoffed, waving dismissively. Let's not pretend this is about providing jobs. This is about greed, pure and simple. You've become everything you once claimed to stand against. That was the moment Lopez truly snapped. Her voice rose to a level that made everyone in the studio flinch. How dare you? How dare you sit there and judge me when you have no idea what I've sacrificed, what I've built, what I've overcome? The raw emotion in her voice was palpable, cutting through the studio like a knife. For a brief moment, Kimmel seemed taken aback by the genuine pain he'd unleashed, but his ego wouldn't allow him to back down now. Oh, here we go, he said with theatrical eye-rolling. The victim card, classic Jennifer Lopez. When confronted with uncomfortable truths, play the victim. Lopez took a step closer to Kimmel's desk, her eyes blazing. Victim? You think I'm playing victim? You invited me here under false pretenses. You've spent the last 10 minutes attacking my character based on gossip and half-truths, and now you're mocking my emotional response to your cruelty? The word cruelty seemed to echo in the suddenly silent studio. Even Kimmel's usually supportive audience was shifting uncomfortably, many of them beginning to realize that their beloved host had gone too far. Cruelty? Kimmel repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I call it journalism. Maybe you've been surrounded by sycophants for so long that you've forgotten what real questions sound like. Lopez laughed, but it was a bitter, hollow sound. Journalism? Is that what you call this character assassination? You're not a journalist, Jimmy. You're a coward who hides behind your desk and your audience, taking cheap shots at people who can't fight back because they're guests in your house. The insult clearly stung Kimmel more than he wanted to admit. His face flushed red, and for a moment, his carefully constructed television persona completely cracked. You know what, Jennifer? Maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is that you can't handle the fact that not everyone buys into your carefully manufactured image. Manufactured? Lopez's voice reached a pitch that made the studio microphones crackle. My image? You want to talk about manufactured? Let's talk about your image, Jimmy. Let's talk about how you present yourself as this lovable, harmless comedian, when really you're nothing but a bully who gets his rocks off humiliating people for entertainment. The studio audience was dead, silent now, witnessing something that felt more like a public breakdown than television. Several people in the front rows looked genuinely uncomfortable, some even horrified by what they were seeing. Kimmel's mask had completely slipped now. You know what your real problem is? You can't stand that someone finally called you out on your bullshit. You've been coasting on this "I'm just a regular girl" act for so long that you actually believe it yourself. Lopez was trembling with fury now, her professional composure completely abandoned. You're disgusting. You're absolutely disgusting. This isn't entertainment. This isn't comedy. This is just cruelty for the sake of cruelty. And you're a hypocrite, Kimmel shot back. A privileged, out-of-touch hypocrite who's forgotten where she came from. That was the final straw. Lopez grabbed her purse from beside her chair with such force that it knocked over her water glass, sending liquid cascading across Kimmel's desk. "I'm done. I'm absolutely done with this." She turned toward the exit, but Kimmel couldn't resist one final devastating blow that would seal his reputation as the villain of this encounter. "That's right. Run away," Kimmel called out, his voice echoing through the stunned studio. "Just like you always do when things get real. At least now your fans will see who you really are underneath all that designer packaging." Lopez froze in her tracks, her back still turned to the audience. For a moment the entire studio held its breath, waiting to see if she would respond or simply walk away. When she slowly turned around, her face was a mask of cold fury that made everyone in the room instinctively lean back. "You want to know who I really am?" she said, her voice now eerily calm, which somehow made it more terrifying than when she was shouting. "I'm someone who built an empire from nothing. I'm someone who employs hundreds of people, who has created opportunities for countless others, who has given back to communities that look like the one I came from." She took a step back toward the desk, and Kimmel visibly tensed. "But you're just a small, bitter man who tears down successful people because it makes you feel bigger. You hide behind your jokes and your audience. But deep down, you know, you're nothing but a coward." The studio audience was completely silent, many of them now looking at Kimmel with expressions of disgust and disappointment. Even his own band members were shaking their heads, clearly appalled by their boss's behavior. "You think this is entertainment?" Lopez continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You think humiliating people is comedy? Well, congratulations, Jimmy. You've just shown the world exactly what kind of person you are, and it's ugly." Kimmel tried to regain control of the situation, but his usual confidence had completely evaporated. "Look, Jennifer, maybe we got a little heated here, but—" "No!" Lopez cut him off sharply. "You don't get to walk this back now. You don't get to pretend this was just a misunderstanding. You orchestrated this entire ambush, and now you have to live with the consequences." She gestured toward the cameras that were still rolling. "All of this is on tape, every cruel word, every malicious attack, every moment where you showed your true colors. And tomorrow, when people watch this, they're going to see exactly who Jimmy Kimmel really is." The threat hung in the air like a sword of Damocles. Kimmel's face had gone pale as the reality of the situation began to sink in. He had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, said things that couldn't be taken back, and it was all being broadcast to millions of viewers. "You know what the saddest part is?" Lopez continued, her voice now filled with genuine pity. "You had everything. You had respect. You had a platform. You had the ability to uplift people and create something positive. Instead, you chose to be a bully. You chose cruelty over kindness, destruction over creation." She picked up her purse again, but this time, her movements were deliberate and dignified. "I feel sorry for you, Jimmy. I really do. Because at the end of the day, I'll go home to people who love me, to a career that I'm proud of, to a life that has meaning. But you'll go home knowing that you destroyed your own reputation for a few minutes of cheap thrills." The studio audience began to murmur among themselves, many of them nodding in agreement with Lopez's words. Some were even starting to applaud, a slow clap that began to build momentum throughout the room. Kimmel sat down heavily in his chair, looking suddenly old and defeated. "Jennifer, don't," she said firmly. "Just don't. We're done here." As Lopez walked toward the exit, the applause from the studio audience grew louder and more sustained. She paused at the edge of the stage and turned back one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, addressing the audience directly, "thank you for witnessing this. Remember what you saw here tonight. Remember how power can corrupt people, how fame can make them forget their humanity. And remember that you have the power to hold people accountable for their actions." With that, Jennifer Lopez walked off the stage with her head held high, leaving behind a studio full of shocked faces and a host whose career would never be the same. The cameras continued rolling as Kimmel sat in stunned silence, unable to muster even a closing joke or transition to commercial. Within hours, clips of the confrontation were trending across all social media platforms. The hashtag #JimmyKimmelExposed began trending worldwide, with millions of viewers expressing their disgust at the host's behavior. Major sponsors began pulling their advertisements from the show, and entertainment industry professionals spoke out about the need for better treatment of guests. The incident became a watershed moment in entertainment, sparking conversations about power dynamics, respect, and professionalism in the industry. Lopez's dignified exit and powerful final speech were praised as a masterclass in maintaining composure under attack, while Kimmel's reputation suffered irreparable damage. The days that followed, ratings for Jimmy Kimmel Live plummeted to historic lows as viewers tuned out in droves. The confrontation had revealed something ugly about the host that audiences couldn't unsee, and the show's future hung in the balance. Meanwhile, Lopez's handling of the situation earned her widespread praise and actually boosted her career, with many calling her response a perfect example of how to stand up to bullies while maintaining dignity and grace. The incident ultimately highlighted the importance of respect and professionalism in the entertainment industry, serving as a cautionary tale about the consequences of crossing lines that should never be crossed.